to the system, I'm an architect. Where others see problems, I see the system. A customer changes their address. The new address is recorded in a message. The old address remains in the order system. Accounting uses a different record. The shipping label is generated based on even older information. Everyone is talking about the same customer, but each system believes a different reality. Then the package goes to the wrong place. The invoice is corrected. The customer has to explain the situation all over again. The team tries to figure out who made the mistake. People assume that incorrect information was entered. Sometimes they're wrong. The problem isn't that the information is wrong. The problem is that the same information is considered correct in more than one place. In log 017, we transformed lost requests into a visible flow. We realized that every request must have an owner, a time, and a result. However, even a visible flow isn't enough on its own. If the information carried by the flow changes as it passes through each gate, the system fragments the truth as it progresses. A name is corrected, a price is updated, a status changes, a decision is made, but the change remains in only one place. Other records continue to carry the old truth. This is where the silent conflict begins. Systems do not argue with one another. Screens don't shout. Databases don't object. Each one preserves the latest information it was given, and old information appears reliable precisely because it has been stored correctly. That's why the most dangerous error isn't always corrupted data. Sometimes it's an old truth that's been stored flawlessly. People think there is only one truth. In systems, however, the truth multiplies easily. A spreadsheet, a customer record, an email, a note, a message history, an accounting program. Every copy may be correct at the moment it is created, but as time passes, the copies age, one changes, the others remain silent, then people don't know which record to trust. One employee looks at the message history, another opens the spreadsheet, yet another remembers what the customer last said. The same question yields 3 different answers. This isn't just a technical problem. This is the architecture of trust, because when people enter data into a system, they don't just leave information behind, they leave an expectation. They believe this record will be preserved, they believe it will be found when needed, they believe that when it changes, other places will know about it too. When the system fails to meet this expectation, it's not just the transaction that breaks down. People lose their trust in the system itself. If an organization's truth depends on employees' memories, a bit of the past is lost with every departure. If a system's truth depends on copies, a new conflict arises with every update. That is why the architect seeks authority first, not data. Where did this information originate? Who can change it? Which record is considered the original? Where do other systems learn about changes? When an error occurs, which version of the past is recalled? Integration built without answering these questions merely multiplies copies more quickly. Sending a piece of information to 5 systems instantly is not order. If it's unclear which one is the original, you're simply producing uncertainty faster. People often set up automation to reduce repetition, but poorly designed automation repeats the error as well. If an address is wrong, it goes to 5 places incorrectly. If a price is outdated, the old price spreads across all channels. If a status is closed incorrectly, everyone assumes the task is complete. Speed is no substitute for the right architecture. The architect first identifies a single source. Then they establish a change trace. Information originates in one place. It is modified by an authorized party. Other systems receive this change. Every step is recorded. If a conflict arises, the rationale behind each decision remains visible. This structure is sometimes called the single source of truth. But the issue is not merely about choosing a database. The issue is defining responsibility for the truth, because not all information originates in the same place. A customer's address may reside in the customer record, payment status in the financial system, delivery status in the logistics system. No single system should own everything, But every piece of information must have an owner. Information without an owner eventually turns into rumor. Information with multiple owners leads to conflict. That's why the architect doesn't consolidate all records in a single place. He assigns a single authority to each piece of truth. Then he establishes reliable pathways between systems. The truth can be replicated, but its source must not be forgotten. Because if there are multiple truths in a system, none of them is actually reliable. Owning a piece of information does not mean storing it. It means knowing when it changed, why it changed, and who should be affected by that change. Because the greatest enemy of the truth is not a lie. It is accurate information that has lost its context. A price might have been correct yesterday, an address might have been correct last month. If the system does not track time, it treats the past as if it were today, and an old decision continues to function as if it were a new order. That's why the architect doesn't just record the value, it also records the time and the source and the reason for the change, because when a piece of information changes, it's not just a single line that gets updated. All decisions that rely on that information are affected. If a customer's address changes, the order, billing, and delivery systems must know it. If a product's price changes, the store, promotional campaigns, and accounting systems must not rely on different figures. If an employee's permissions are revoked, their old access should not continue to exist silently. When reality changes, the paths connected to it must also change, but most systems do not share changes. They share copies. A table is exported. A file is sent via email. A record is pasted into another application. At that moment, two realities are born. One continues to exist. The other carries the moment it was frozen. People call this a backup, a report, or a convenience. The architect, however, sees the distinction. When did a copy become disconnected from its source? Who still believes it is up to date? Which decisions are being made based on this outdated view? If there are no answers to these questions, there is information in the system, but no trust. The sole source of truth is not to lock all systems into a single box, because each system must carry out its own function. Accounting preserves the reality of money, logistics preserves the reality of movement, the customer system preserves the reality of the relationship, the identity system preserves the reality of access. The architect does not crush all these realities into a single place. Instead, they define the boundaries between them and the paths of trust. When one system receives information from another, it must know three things. Where did this information come from? When was it generated? Is it still valid? There is data transfer, but no verification. Sometimes two systems modify the same information at the same time. An employee corrects a customer's phone number. At the same time, the customer enters a different number from their own account. Which one is correct? The most recent change? The most authoritative source? The information provided by the customer, or the verified information? If the system silently resolves this conflict, it selects a single truth but hides the reasoning behind it. The architect makes the conflict visible, because some decisions can be made automatically. Others, however, require context. The most recent record is not always the most accurate one. Accuracy sometimes requires evaluating time, source, and evidence together. That's why good architecture doesn't just establish synchronization, it also establishes conflict resolution rules. Which information is considered superior based on its source? Which changes require a second approval? Under what circumstances does automatic transfer stop? Under what circumstances is a human consulted? If the system is accelerated without answering these questions, it also accelerates conflicts. People mistake the interconnection of systems for progress. They are mistaken. Connection alone is not progress. When two erroneous sources are connected, the error propagates further. An API does not produce the truth. It merely transmits it. An integration does not create accountability. It merely opens pathways. The architect first determines which information belongs to whom. Then they establish the pathway. Because a pathway is only as reliable as what it carries. For truth to circulate between systems, changes must leave a trail. previous value, new value, source of the change, time of the change, reason for the change, affected systems. This trail is not kept solely to find errors. It is kept to preserve memory. One day when someone asks why, the system must be able to answer. Why did this address change? Why was this price applied? Why was this order paused? Why was this permission revoked? If the answer resides only in a person's memory, the system is not yet mature. The architect leaves behind an explainable history, because power is not merely the ability to make decisions, it is the ability to preserve a record of the decisions made. A system's reliability does not come from being error-free. It comes from having a way to return to the truth when an error occurs, knowing the previous value, reverting the change, finding the affected records, correcting incorrect copies. These are the system's ability to self-heal. People think that robust systems never fail. The architect knows better. Robust systems are those that know where to pick up where they left off when they fail. The only truth is not an unchanging record. It is an order that does not lose its trail when it changes, and trust begins not with everyone seeing the same thing, but with knowing where what they see comes from. Identifying the source of truth is not enough on its own, because even if a system knows what to trust, if it doesn't know how that change will reach other structures, conflict will arise again. That is why the architect does not establish a single center. Instead, the architect establishes an order. Every piece of information resides in its own authoritative source. Every change is recorded as an event. Systems that need it retrieve this event. They update their own records, and when the process is complete, it leaves a trace. Thus, information is not merely copied, its journey also becomes visible. When a customer changes their address, the system does not merely store the new value, it also tracks whether this change has reached the relevant structures. If a link in the chain is not updated, silence is not considered success. The missing step becomes visible, because a good system does not merely produce the correct answer, it also knows whether the correct answer has reached its destination. People often think that data synchronization is the solution, but synchronization can turn into mindless duplication. One system tells another what it sees, the other accepts it, then a third system sends back an older record. Instead of moving forward, it goes back in time. That's why the architect assigns an identity to every change, a time, a source, a version. When the same information arrives again, the system can determine whether it is new, old, or has been processed before. Without this distinction, automation could run the same event over and over again. The same process could run twice. An old record might undo the new correction. The system speeds up, but it loses its way. The architect prioritizes memory over speed, because an integration without memory is merely a transit point. It knows what it's carrying, but it doesn't know what it did before. True architecture begins here. Each system carries its own responsibility. None of them acts as if it possesses the whole truth. The customer system is the source of the relationship. The financial system is the source of payment. The logistics system is the source of movement. The identity system is the source of access. The paths between them are open, but the boundaries are also open. When one system wants to change the reality of another domain, it does not do so directly. It sends a request to the authorized source. The decision is made there. The result is shared again. This subtle distinction marks the boundary between order and chaos. Because in a place where anyone can change everything, information is not free. It is ownerless, and ownerless information shatters at the first mistake. The architect does not establish ownership for the sake of centralization. He establishes it so that responsibility is not lost. When an error occurs, it must be clear which door to turn to. When information is debated, it must be clear which source has the final say. Thus, the system does not demand blind trust. It builds trust through evidence. The architecture of a single truth does not promise perfection. It promises something more valuable. When a conflict arises, it does not hide it. When old information resurfaces, it recognizes it. When an update is incomplete, it does not remain silent. When a system fails to respond, it does not wait forever. It tries again. If it exceeds a limit, it issues a warning. If necessary, it places the operation in a safe queue, and it does not present failure as if it were complete, because protecting the truth is not merely about preserving the correct value. It is about preventing what is wrong from continuing to exist as if it were right. You don't have to change all your systems today. Start by choosing a single piece of information, an address, a price, an order status, an access permission. Then ask these questions. Where does this information originate? Who can change it? Where do other systems get it from? What traces does a change leave behind? When there's a conflict, which source takes precedence? If these answers aren't available, the information isn't yet part of the system. It's just copies living on different screens. When the answers become visible, the system changes. People no longer have to remember the same thing, so copies do not act as authorities. Automation does not blindly replicate errors. Every change is linked to its source. Every decision carries its history, and it moves between real systems without getting lost. The architect's job is not to lock all information away in a single place. It is to make visible where the truth resides, how it changes, and the paths it takes, because order does not mean everyone keeps the same record. It is knowing why everyone trusts a particular record. In this record, I didn't just show you data conflicts, I also showed you how to protect the truth. You can see more closely on SHORT.LOG how the architect breaks down systems and transforms distributed structures into order. I am the architect. We'll meet again in the next log. When that day comes, you'll understand why these logs exist. System status, active, protocol, 00 entity, complete. Next protocol, status, active,